achieve the Holy Grail. Okay? There were some premonitions that this person, this knight, would be able to achieve the Holy Grail. And it's very well, the story of Galahad is developed by Thomas Mallory, that he's another knight who put a little bit all of this material together in the 15th century with the death of Arthur. Galahad is the one who is able to extract the famous sword from the stone that is floating in a river. No one else could. They are at dinner again with Arthur and all the knights, and another damsel appears saying to Arthur that the Holy Grail will appear briefly, in short, in a few moments. And in fact, the Grail appears hidden by a cloth, but radiating a sweet fragrance and also making everybody look younger and stronger. They have a very brief glance at the Grail, which suddenly disappears. Now, synthesizes very much the story. A lot of things happen between that. All the knights at the King's Arthur table decide that they have to set out for another adventure to look for the Grail. And they all leave Arthur, and they all decide to leave from different points. They decide to leave from different entrance points in the wood, and each one has to choose their path, and a path that is not already there. So they have to enter the woods where there is no path. Okay? That's what they decide to do. The only ones that don't follow them are Galahad, as I mentioned before, Percival, and Bors. They sail into a mystical ship, that's how it's described. So they don't go through the woods, they go through a mystical ship, directed to Jerusalem, where the Grail is said to have left, to go to be found in there. So all of those knights obviously will fail in their attempt. Okay? They fail because, according to the story, they are excessively preoccupied with, let's say, worldly matters. Okay? Well, Galad's objective and Percival and Bar's objective is really to find the Grail. As I mentioned before, Percival and Bors are blinded by the sight of the Grail when they manage to reach it. Okay? They have not yet fulfilled something. They haven't yet fulfilled their spiritual responsibility. So they aren't ready yet to perceive a truth or the truth. And this tells us that there is really no shortcut to enlightenment. Okay? So there is no shortcut to the realization of something meaningful. There is no such a thing of unearned wisdom. One has to achieve it for himself, and if one is not ready, one needs to work on it. There is still work that needs to be done. Only Galahad is able to see it. And not only does he see it, but he is welcomed by a priest who tells him, "You are like me, you are pure of heart, and you are ready, in a way. And I am the last one of a millennial tradition of men who have transmitted a knowledge that needs to remain secret." So these mysterious teachings are teachings that are found in, as I mentioned before, in the Kabbalah tradition, but also in the early Christianity, esoteric Christianity. And they all revolve around a rigorous spiritual practice, rigorous spiritual discipline, and the mystery that concerns the passing from this life to the next. Okay, and obviously very similar to other traditions, because we find this kind of teachings also in the Eastern tradition. We think about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Also in Christianity there were these kind of traditions, okay? These kind of teachings, which were condemned by the church of the time, which they deemed that it was unorthodox to believe that one could access the divinity by himself or herself. You know? So it was condemned by the church, and therefore all these authors, some of which were nuns, had to find a way to continue transmitting a message, and they chose the way of the Romans, which at the time was very popular. Only certain people, we call them certain initiate to a certain understanding, to a certain knowledge, would understand the story, would understand the purpose of the story. The others, and many, there were many, would read it as a chivalric story, full of meaning, again, full of many interesting aspects. But that was, we use the word, we can use the word simulacra, okay? It was a way to dissimulate a truth, to keep it hidden, to keep certain teachings or certain ideas hidden, because obviously they were condemned, but also because for their nature they need to remain hidden. Why? Because as many who have studied the mythos of the Grail says, the secret that the Grail quest seeks to transmit is very much outside our mind's grasp. The language we use, the way we reason, it's difficult to understand certain ideas, as I said earlier, by using the means, let's say, that we use in everyday life. So we need to access a level of understanding of reality that doesn't come natural, doesn't come immediate to us. That's why all of these traditions also bring about a certain level of spiritual practices. Spiritual practices are practices that help the individual access a different level of consciousness. Okay, so practices of the mind, for example. We call them today very often practices of mindfulness, of these kind of things. In reality, they are very ancient, and they are not just pertaining to the Eastern tradition. Okay? In this story, the Grail become holy. Okay, before it was only the Grail, no holy. As I said before, holy means sacred, right? Meaningful. Why is the quest of the Grail meaningful? The quest of the Grail is meaningful, and because those who seek for it have dedicated their whole life. It's an all-consuming task. It's not just one journey, okay? Didn't make it, go back home. No, they dedicated their whole lives to attain the Grail. And not everybody is, as I mentioned before, is able to sustain the effort, and also not everybody is able to handle the mystery behind the Grail. Everyone at different stages can understand something. If you remember, the word Grail itself means stages. Okay? Not everyone gets to the essence of the Grail in one go, like Allah did. In another way, the story of the Grail expresses also a fundamental human truth that keeps reappearing, because as I said before, this is a very eclectic story. It brings about elements from different traditions, not just the, let's say, Christian medieval tradition, okay? And it expresses a fundamental human truth, but also a need, okay, to connect with elements that are timeless, patterns that are timeless and are fundamentally concerned with ourselves, with the human condition. Campbell thought that the Grail myth was a very Western way to express this need, this fundamental human need. It's the myth of the Western man. Why? But when it's in that choice of the different nights to enter the forest alone and in different moments and in different places, alone, in solitude. Okay, it's quite specific, let's say, of the Western tradition to focus on, or to stress our own individual self-realization. And oftentimes, this is important because oftentimes we stop, we don't even start our journey of self-discovery because we are concerned about all the different problems that surround us in the world or in our circumstances, in our existence. While what Campbell stresses at is that the path of self-discovery, which is also what the Grail is about, is first and foremost an individual path. All these heroes are really never alone, but they are alone in their quest. They suffer alone. They find counsel, of course, they find inspiration in a lady or in a Merlin, didn't mention yet, but it's okay, or in a hermit. But they have to go through the struggle with themselves and through the different periods of the journey alone. And it's very different from the Eastern tradition is as more of a universal collective approach, okay, to I'm going to use the word salvation, but it's very Christian, and I don't mean it in a religious way. Okay? Individual path is that path that we all have, this yearning, let's say, to fulfill our life. So it's that life that will allow us to make, to bring our life into being. So that which moves us forward so that our life can happen in a way. And it's in all Western civilization heroes' journeys, this idea that the treasure at the end, which is this encounter with ourself, okay, is a treasure that is quite hard to attain. But it's in everyone's soul. It's in everyone's. And it determines, more or less consciously, our own life. It determines whether we go for it or not, of course. One of the teachings of the Great Quest is this. And it's one of the ways in which these authors try to initiate, let's say, people to a little mystery, a little teaching, which is a teaching, as I said, which is more universal than what it looks like, because it's found in many different traditions. The Grail, it's not of this world, but it exists, as I said at the beginning, and it requires our own individual effort, our own effort to become aware of our own self, of our nature. And it reflects itself in the choice we make, in how we live our life, how we conduct ourselves, what becomes our vocation in life, so what becomes our driving force in life. The Great Quest suggests that maybe we should look at making a more, dedicate ourselves, sacrifice probably our life or our time, our efforts to the best in us, the highest in us. is the secret purpose of the Grail? Again, secret means meaningful. That's the meaning of the word, okay? And the consequence of this is, in some tradition called nirvana, in the Greek tradition is eudaimonia. We can translate it with the word serenity, tranquility, being at peace with our own reality, accepting ourselves, our limitations, our place in the world, our duty towards ourselves, first and foremost. Okay? Those who have understood this, or have started to understand this, understand that, as I said before, the dark aspects of life are inevitable. But it's a real understanding, okay? It's not an intellectual understanding. Real understanding means that we understand that we can learn in challenge. We learn from suffering, and we also enjoy life through suffering. Sounds a bit, but we understand that the greatest obstacle in all of our achievements, in reaching that tranquility or serenity, that is in a way a state of balance, if you wish, is ourselves. Okay? The greatest enemy is ourselves. And if we don't recognize this, we become victims of ourselves, victims of life, and we act, in a way, we make that shadow grow instead of retrieve it a bit, instead of coming to life. Because we keep telling ourselves a lie. Most of what happens to us happens, we could be a little, sorry, for most of what happens to us, through awareness, we have more power on what happens to us than we think. That's where I wanted to go. So the Grail is a symbol of the self, of a whole self, okay? If we don't try to become whole, if we don't try to embark in this quest, we are cut off from, our being, let's say, from a certain source, a certain essence of life. We cut ourselves off life, basically, because we don't accept the paradoxes of life. We don't accept life for what it is. We choose to live in fantasy. And one of the attempts that these authors made, as I said at the beginning, is to try to bridge this opposite, even in a, let's say, religious or spiritual plane, okay? And try to make that land fertile again by bridging that Celtic goddess with the king, okay? The material and the spiritual world back together into one, and also recognize that it's in ourselves, it's not just in heaven. The spirituality, okay, or the divine light is not to be found in an external entity, or yes, as well for those who believe in it, but from a, let's say, philosophical or psychological as well point of view, that spiritual life is within ourselves. And it's that realization that brings a spiritual dimension to our life, even if we're not religious. Even if we're not religious. So, the Grail story is a story of the fulfillment, as I said at the beginning of this, the highest spiritual potentiality in ourselves. Okay? And a potentiality that is much more, let's say, part of nature, much more authentic than what we see, than what we think. And the path is perilous, it's difficult, but it's also natural, in a way. Okay? It's natural because we see that it's being told and transmitted in the myth, legends, and the fairy tales as well, and traditions of all civilizations of humanity. So it means that it's not just a need, a necessity, but it's also very important And it's also probably, as I said, a necessity. Through these stories, human beings of different epochs have tried to tell us something. It's not just a nice story of bards and the knights and ladies. If it was like that, there would be no connection or no, let's say, synthesis with any other tradition. It would be a self-contained story. But in reality, the more we look at it, the more we see the connection with other similar myths, with other similar teachings. So this fulfillment of this potential that is in us, this fulfillment of this wholeness, as I said at the beginning, is a strive. It's a movement upward, if you wish, if you want to imagine it like that. It's a movement upward towards the highest in us. But the idea is then to bring back that potentiality, that divine, into our lives. Okay? Do not keep the two separate, because keeping the two separate is what makes, according to these myths, us suffer. Or ignorant as well, if you wish. Okay? In some gospel you would read the kingdom is within ourselves, it's not outside. I'm not going to be preaching here, but if we read it from a philosophical point of view, that means that this quest is an inner quest, as I said before, but I just want to add this, it shouldn't really distract us from, our daily concerns, but it should enrich them, actually. It should enrich the way we deal with our circumstances, with our relationship, so that there is a connection with the spiritual and the material at the same time. And this really requires a lot of heart. That's why the story talks a lot about the purity of the heart. It requires a lot of openness to be able to experience, in a way, life as is, and ourselves as we are. So there's many more things that could be said, but I think I would end it here.